for Battered Women, and Sophia is here from there, and the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I think Donna may be on the phone, or if not, will be joining us shortly. Just a few logistics before we get started. We will be taking questions at the end. You'll see in the bottom left-hand part of your screen that you can type in your questions. Please feel free to type them in at any time. And then we will answer them. As I said, we'll try to leave at between 10 and 15 minutes to answer questions. Those that we don't, that we're not able to answer, we're going to send out probably an email of all the final questions and hopefully get them all answered that way. We are recording this session today. We will be sending out via email the PowerPoint to you, as well as the link if you want to share this webinar with other folks. I also we have you all muted right now, or you can mute yourself by hitting *6 and then unmute at *7. I want to welcome our panelists today. Nikki Tate from Day One will be our moderator. Nikki from Breaking Free, different Nikki, has joined us. Erin from Catholic Charities. Lauren from Northern Tier Anti-Trafficking Consortium from the International Institute of Minnesota. Linda from Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center, and Artika from Family Partnership Pride. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And if somebody, if you cannot hear us or if you're having other technical difficulties, please feel free to put that in the chat feature. And I also see, I want to welcome Donna Dunn from the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and her staff have joined us as well. So thank you, and we'll get started with Lauren.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, January 11th, is Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and I want to second all of those thank yous to our sponsors, and especially for Day One, who is hosting and has helped us. I also want to thank all the panelists that we have. This has really been a collaborative effort, and I think it's very unique that we get to have all of these organizations in the same room, and a really good opportunity for everyone listening to get information on trafficking in Minnesota, so I'm really excited. The breakdown of this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to give a brief overview of human trafficking in Minnesota, and then we're going to talk about the intersections with domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And then we're going to give everyone, all the organizations that are here, an opportunity to explain what services they provide, what populations they serve, and how you can best reach them and make referrals to their organizations. So like I said, we're really excited. We should have 10 to 20 minutes at the end for some questions, interactions, and I encourage that. This is a really great opportunity to ask questions, to learn about services, and to learn how to make referrals. One other note, the first part of the slides were prepared by Hemweld Coffey. He is the coordinator for trafficking services at Catholic Charities. So he unfortunately has a sick child at home, so I will be doing my best to do his piece, but these are his slides. I won't take credit for his work, but I will do my best. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to go through what is human trafficking, whether it's happening in Minnesota, who are our victims and what are their vulnerabilities. We'll define domestic violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. A big part of this, again, is going to be discussing what are the intersections with domestic violence and sexual assault. How do we identify our victims, and what are some red flags or screening or assessment questions we can ask? And then the biggest and best part, I think, is really what trafficking services do we have here. And like I said, we'll leave some time for discussion. Our definitions, we have a federal and state definition of human trafficking. Our federal definition, this comes from the Trafficking Victim Protection Act of 2000. It defines severe forms of trafficking in persons as sex trafficking and labor. Sex trafficking is in which a commercial act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or if someone is a minor, hasn't reached the age of 18, you just need the commercial act. You do not need that element of force, fraud, or coercion. Labor trafficking, we have the recruitment, harboring, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services. Again, we come back to this element of force, fraud, or coercion, and this is for the purposes of involuntary servitude, peonage, which really means the same thing as debt bondage, or slavery. Our state defines this a little differently. We still have the recruitment, transportation, obtaining a person, and this would be either for commercial sex or labor or services. I wish I would have highlighted it, but in both these definitions it says by any means. So it doesn't use that language of force, fraud, or coercion, so it's actually a little bit easier of a standard to charge or convict someone under our state statute versus the federal statute. But as you'll come to know, a lot of different agencies that work with trafficking follow the federal statutes and have services based on the federal statute. So is trafficking occurring in Minnesota? Quick answer, yes. The State Department estimates that anywhere from 15,000 to 18,000 people are trafficked into the United States each year. The International Labor Organization estimates that somewhere around 20.9 million people are enslaved worldwide. That number just made a significant jump. When I was giving presentations about 6 months ago, I think the number was 12.9, and it jumped up to 20.9 worldwide. So that includes sex and labor trafficking. The average age of a girl's entry into prostitution or sex trafficking is 12 to 14, and I've heard different numbers on this. I think it's actually maybe a little bit lower at 11, but it's very young. As far as our state-related charges or convictions, we're looking around anywhere from 600 to 400. The numbers kind of vary. And this can be charges of labor trafficking, sex trafficking. It can be disorderly conduct, solicitation of prostitution. So there's a lot of different crimes that are involved. And then according to the Shapiro study, in 2010, there was a jump or an increase of 55% of minor girls that were sold online. So that's a very significant jump in 1 year of the sale of minors online. So we know it's happening here. We know it's increasing in numbers. We just need to get our awareness building so that we can correctly identify it. Where human trafficking is happening on a global level and very similar in Minnesota, these are some of the places that we're going to see it. It happens quite frequently in households. Domestic servitude is what you could think of. Individuals that have to cook, clean, take care of family members, children, and they do not get paid, but they are working pretty much 24 hours, 7 days a week. Some other areas could be restaurants, nail salons, factories, hotels, agriculture. The best way to think of it is trafficking can occur in any industry where there is a demand for cheap labor and there is a lack of oversight of labor laws or enforcing those laws. Sex trafficking, this can be occurring on the streets, massage parlors, strip clubs, escort services, online. A lot of people will refer to Backpage, and then brothels. When I think of the term brothels, I think of Las Vegas, big lights that light up and say brothel. But what we're really talking about is ordinary houses, the house next door to you, Johns coming in and out, or apartment buildings. Child trafficking, again, online exploitation. Again, Backpage is one of the biggest culprits of this. Pornography, prostitution, magazine sales crews, and then globally we're going to be talking about child soldiers or different types of factories or sweatshops. In Minnesota, it's going to be very similar. We're going to find the same types of industries, the same places that we're going to find it. We don't obviously have much of a problem with child soldiers, so that's not up there, and I will talk about mail order brides in just a bit. So who are our victims? Our victims can be an individual, it can be a whole family, or it can be a whole group or community. In some countries, there's whole villages that are swept up into forced labor for different factories. The individual can be educated, or they can be illiterate. They can be adults, or they can be minors. Really important to remember, they can be U.S. citizens, or they can be international foreign nationals. Some studies are coming out that there's going to be a higher percentage of U.S. citizens that are victims of sex trafficking, and then for foreign nationals, they're usually a little bit higher, victimized by labor trafficking. So keep that in mind. Sex trafficking is a really big problem for U.S. citizens, for people at home. The victims can be men or women. They can be documented or undocumented. If they're immigrants, they can come into the country illegally and then be picked up into a trafficking ring. And always keep in mind, someone can be the victim of both sex and labor. There are certain characteristics that can make someone more vulnerable to trafficking. Poverty is obviously going to be the #1 cause. Gender violence is another one. Individuals that lack a social safety nets or friends or family around, runaway youth, homeless, unwanted youth, they call them. People out on the streets are extremely vulnerable to trafficking. They don't have anyone around. They don't have any support system. They're on their own. And then, of course, mail order brides. It's tricky. The act of ordering a bride online is not necessarily trafficking, but once they were to come into the United States, they're very isolated. Many times they don't know the language. They don't have a support system, so they are very susceptible to trafficking. Again, economic hardship is up there. Debt bondage. This can happen a lot with international and domestic cases, but you will have recruiters of factories or companies go abroad and say, it'll only cost you and your family $10,000. I'll bring you over to the United States. You'll have it paid off in a month, and then you'll have this great job. But they're forever paying this ever increasing, never able to pay down this debt. So that's called debt bondage. And then, of course, demand for cheap labor. We also think of this with, it could be international or domestic workers, migrant workers, people that travel around the United States working on different farms. These individuals are vulnerable because they're very hard to track. They move so much. If they were to file a complaint against their employer just might have them shipped down to Florida or to another state so that no one can ever follow up on these complaints. And I want to emphasize that this happens to our U.S. citizens and our international foreign-born. Sexual orientation. Our LGBTQ community is very at risk for trafficking. If they're isolated, they could be kicked out of their home. Again, they don't have that social support system in place, so they end up trusting some pretty bad people. So our studies are showing that homeless runaway youth are among the pimp's easiest targets. A quote, which is pretty devastating, kind of shows this effect, and it says, you can just smell the desperation. These young men are forced to engage in survival sex. Often they're swept up into sex trafficking, and there's not much that is said or done. And I can tell you this goes for both our girls and our boys, that we see this happening and not much is said or done about it. All right, now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about how human trafficking really intersects with domestic violence and sexual assault. We know that these are 3 different crimes or 3 different offenses that can be committed against a person. But what I really want to highlight is how someone can be the victim of multiple crimes in the same situation and how these really coincide with each other. I'm a very visual person. I love charts, so I've made up these little charts. I apologize if they're not helpful to some. But for our domestic violence, we have the act to cause fear, or we have the actual infliction of harm. And then in order for it to be domestic violence, we have to have that relationship component. So we have our definitions of who's a household member, who fits into that intimate partner relationship. So that's domestic violence. Sexual assault, again, we have our actions. This can be the sexual contact or sexual penetration. And then by what means were they brought in, forced into that action? So we have force, we have coercion, and we have threat. And then human trafficking. Like I said, I usually just stick with the federal definition because that's what I have to use a lot for immigration purposes. But keep in mind, we do have our state definition in place too. Federally, we have our actions. So how did the person get into the situation? So this is our recruitment, transportation, harboring, enticing, and obtaining. Our means, how is that person kept in the situation? So we really rely on that force, fraud, or coercion, and we need that for the federal statute. I have little stars next to our means and with sex trafficking, because in Minnesota that does not apply. And then for what purpose? What was the purpose or goal? Was it the involuntary servitude, sex trade, slavery, debt bondage? So some similarities between domestic violence and human trafficking. Both are intentional manifestations of power and control. Throughout these slides, you're going to hear me refer to power and control numerous times. All three of these crimes that we're talking about have to do with power and control. Trafficking and DV survivors suffer abuse at the hands of those that are closest to them, those that they trust, those that they love, those that they have developed relationships with. Both can live and be under the control of either the trafficker or the abuser. Some traits shared or harms inflicted on both could be physical, sexual violence, the isolation, threats of harm, name-calling, degrading, shames, threats of legal process, a lot of threats of taking away children, and then, of course, controlling documents. And that doesn't refer just to international, that's also with U.S. You'd be amazed how difficult it is to do anything if you don't have your driver's license or some way to identify yourself. And then both DV and human trafficking do not self-identify as victims. Both just think they're in really terrible situations, and for some unknown reason, this person that they love, this person that they trust, their employer, is treating them terribly, and this is their life. But they don't necessarily think that they're the victim of a crime. So we know they're similar, but we also know they're different. Some differences is human trafficking, it's most likely to result in multiple victims, and versus domestic violence, you're going to have maybe one or a family unit. You can have pimps or you can have employers that are trafficking multiple victims at the same time. Traffickers most likely have additional resources, or they could have networks that span beyond the United States into different countries. So threats of harming family members can seem really more real to trafficking survivors than maybe domestic violence or getting to individuals abroad. Trafficking is more likely to exploit men than it is women, whereas domestic violence, we know the numbers are pretty overwhelming that females will be victims. And then foreign-born, for protections with trafficking, there is a connection to cooperating with the criminal investigation and prosecution. Unfortunately, it can be difficult to get relief for foreign-born if they do not cooperate with law enforcement, which isn't necessarily true with domestic violence. Some intersections, some places where individuals can suffer both the abuses of domestic violence and human trafficking. think of individuals that grow up in abusive households, dysfunctional family situations, whether that's based on their sex, their gender identity, their sexual orientation. They can be more vulnerable to trafficking. Traffickers exploit the already lower self-esteem individuals who've experienced prior trauma, and it's pretty amazing. They share the same characteristic that abusers do in my mind. They're really able to point people out that have suffered prior trauma or grew up in a really bad household. They're able to see them on streets and identify them just by body language and know that they can approach these individuals and project themselves as someone they can trust and love and gain a relationship that way and then force them to do pretty terrible things. And of course, trafficking survivors are more vulnerable to future incidents of domestic violence. The reverse is also true. Domestic violence survivors are also more susceptible to trafficking. And again, that just goes back to the prior victimization. Some cases where individuals can experience both DV and human trafficking in the same situation. You have cases where traffickers force spouse, significant other to perform services such as the domestic servitude, forcing them to cook, clean, take care of children, not allowing them to work, or forcing them to work at a family business, or forcing them into the sex industry. Cases where individuals are recruited into sex trafficking by the pimp, falsifying or faking a love interest in them. Again, they build this trust, they build this relationship with an individual that they know is hurting and needing support and needing someone, and then they use patterns of domestic violence and coercion to control them, to gain power over them, and then to force them into sex or labor trafficking. And then cases where individuals are forced by other family members, so this can be parents, it can be siblings, and again, it would be sex or labor trafficking. I know all of my advocates out there are very familiar with this power and control wheel by the Duluth, now I can't remember the name of it, Duluth model. So I'm not going to go over this, I just wanted you guys to have this. And then Polaris Project, which is a national organization that works on human trafficking issues. And if you ever want some additional information, Google them and you'll get some great information. But they've created a similar wheel for sex and labor trafficking. You know, compare and contrast them. It's amazing how similar they are and how the tactics used by traffickers and abusers is very similar. And sexual assault. We know sexual assault is used as a tool, as a means to control and degrade another individual. So again, this is still based on this power and control and the exploitation of another human being. It is a common misconception that sexual violence or sexual assault only occurs in sex trafficking and only to women. We are seeing more and more cases where it occurs to men or women in labor trafficking situations. I think mostly of domestic servitude cases, but it also frequently happens when someone's at a factory or in a restaurant. Traffickers are really using this as a means to degrade someone and then control them. Some intersections, and these are going to seem very similar to the domestic violence cases. The commercial sex industry, of course, keep in mind not all involved, are sex trafficking survivors, but those that are engaged are at a much higher risk of sexual assault, and we know that this crime is going underreported, and there's a lot of that goes into the associated stigma with prostitution, and I hate that word, and I'll let Nikki from Breaking Free tell you why, but the stigma with prostitution or forced prostitution and the underreporting of sexual assault. Involuntary servitude, I keep coming back to this, but if someone's forced to work, clean, stay at home, sexual assault is commonly used against the person to control them. And then a workplace, like I said, any workplace. You can have a restaurant, bar, factories, agriculture, where people will report being sexually assaulted so the employer can get them to do what they want. So how are our victims identified? They could be identified through contact with law enforcement. If law enforcement is called out to a domestic violence, disorderly conduct call, they could be identified that way. Victim service providers, this is going to be you guys. If they're seeking help, the first place they might get referred to is a domestic violence shelter or a sexual assault program. So it would be through you guys screening these individuals that we would identify them as trafficking. Attorneys, you can have the criminal attorneys, we can have prosecutors, immigration attorneys, different immigrant organizations, Good Samaritans, people that take the time to realize that something is not looking right, call the police, or approach the person and ask them if they need help. Faith-based entities, and then of course healthcare facilities if someone goes in with an injury and they screen or ask more in-depth questions to find out about their situation. Some indicators of trafficking or red flags. There can be heavy security on the work site. I always use this example, but if you think of, say, a turkey farm, and outside the turkey farm there's 10-foot fences, and there's armed security guards outside the turkey farm, that does not seem right. That should be a red flag or an indicator that something's not kosher there. If a person lives and works on the premises, that's another big red flag. Obviously, lack of freedom, lack of movement, not in control of their own destiny or their own thoughts or where they want to go. If someone is afraid of discussing their work or their working conditions, any adult or child engaged in prostitution should be a red flag. Obviously, anyone that's showing signs of assault or malnourishment, do not have access to their documents, pays little to nothing, has a very large debt to repay to their employer. If they have a lack of knowledge of the community that they live in, you might see this a little bit more commonly with international survivors, but if they claim to have lived here for 5 years, but they can't tell you where the local grocery store is or pharmacy or what's around them, that could be a red flag. Or on the flip side, a very well-rehearsed story. International survivors, if you think of, well, I'm just here visiting my Aunt Betty, if they can't tell you how they're related to Aunt Betty, on which side, if it's their mother or their father, or where Aunt Betty lives, or individuals involved in sex trafficking as well, the pimps will give them a very well-rehearsed story to tell law enforcement if they come in contact with. Some screening or assessment questions, some things that could be asked of an individual to see if they're involved in trafficking. First and foremost, have you or your family members been threatened? What do you believe will happen if you leave the situation or if you leave your employment? This question is really important, and it's really important to state it as what do you believe will happen, not what will happen. So we really want to get into the victim's mindset on what kind of coercion, mental manipulation has been used against them, or threats. And again, it's not what will happen, what do you believe will happen? Has anyone forced you to do something you don't want to do? I really like that question as well. It's very broad, it's vague, and the individual you're speaking to can tell you what they want to tell you from that. What type of work do you do? Can you come and go as you please? Again, do you owe your employer any money? Do you have access to your documents? Do you get to keep your wages? These are just a few questions I pulled out. You can find tons of screening assessments online or ask anyone on the panel to give you some more assessment questions, and we certainly can do that for you. Some best practices, and I don't mean to preach to the choir. I know everyone listening is very familiar with these, but with any victimization, we always want to make sure we're following a victim-centered approach, realizing that the victim knows what is best for them, knows their situation the best, knows when they're safest, knows when they're in the most danger, and to really follow their lead. Always keeping trauma-informed services in mind, understanding trauma, understanding the effects it can have on our clients and their behaviors and why they might be responding the way they do, and then also how we can make sure not to re-victimize clients when we're working with them. Honoring and reiterating confidentiality whenever possible. With domestic violence, trafficking is the same. You really have to work hard to build an individual's trust after they have been manipulated, coerced, by individuals that they trust and that they possibly loved or had a relationship with. So just at every chance you get, really reiterating that confidentiality where you can. And I just want everyone to keep in mind just the dangers of labeling victims. I don't even like the terminology victims, but that's kind of what we're stuck with. But to make sure that if we're working with someone and we've identified them as a domestic violence victim or a sexual assault, to not just have that as their label, but realize they could be victims of other crimes as well, including trafficking. This can be really important with foreign-born or immigrant populations because it can limit the relief they're entitled to for immigration. It can limit their social services if we just stick them with one label. And then just as a advocacy standpoint or social services standpoint, it's really important to acknowledge all of the crimes that this person has been a victim of and not just attach one label to them. These are just some questions for your agency to think about. If you are a domestic violence or sexual assault agency, you know, is it possible on some of your screening forms, your intake forms, if you do that, or even if you're working with individuals for a long period of time, to just remember to maybe ask one or two of these questions to assess if did their boyfriend ever force them to have sex with someone else for money? Were they ever forced to work someplace and not get paid? Just a way to try to identify trafficking when you're working with someone. Some questions for those of you in rural or greater Minnesota. Keep in mind you might be the only agency within hours that someone can seek services. And this is not me telling you that you have to provide these services. This is just me posing the question and something for your agency to think about. And, what are your protocols regarding males? What would your protocols be regarding labor trafficking males? What's the protocol for prostituted persons or individuals that are identified as trafficking and not as DV or SA? And again, that's just something to think about. Always keeping in mind, if an individual, we can't fit them into that definition of trafficking or domestic violence or sexual assault, that we still have a human being in front of us that does need services. That is our overview. So I'm very impressed with myself that I stayed within time. I never do that. But now we're going to take the time to go through each of our agencies, and they'll get a chance to describe what services they have. So first off is Nikki from Breaking Free.
Good morning, everyone. Breaking Free was started in 1996 by Benita Carter, and I'll list what our 5 organizational goals are. The first is that we provide advocacy and direct services to sex-trafficked women and girls. Second, we provide and or coordinate safe, stable housing for women and their children. We provide educational opportunity to prepare victims for the workforce to enable them to move out of poverty and become self-sustaining to avoid future re-victimization. Fourth, we educate the community about the effects of commercial sexual exploitation on women and girls and the negative effects on the community. And fifth, we decrease the demand for commercial sex. Breaking Free is victim-centered and survivor-led. We understand that escape from the life is a process, and sometimes that's a lifelong process. We promote voluntary participation and ownership for healing. We believe in diversity, and we use an Afrocentric approach, meaning that we understand that many of our women, predominantly African American, are coming into the organization with what's historically happened to African Americans in our society, and that is something that all of the staff need to be culturally competent and aware of in serving the women and children that we serve. We work with and educate law enforcement, criminal justice system, probation, social services, advocates, attorneys, faith communities, men's violence prevention agencies, and the general public. We accomplish these goals that we set forth through our weekly SOS group, Sisters of Survival group. It's survivor-led. It's a 14-week group, and we have graduations every quarter. Just in December, we had 18 women graduate from our SOS group. And it's a specialized curriculum helping women and girls understand the dynamics of sex trafficking and prostitution. We offer individual tutoring. We have internships for our women that have gone through our support groups and have graduated and are considered alumni, and they then work in the organization. And for some women, that is the first time that they're actually paid with a paycheck, and it's incredibly empowering for them. We have community service opportunities. We have a weekly life skills class and a weekly job skills class and employment services as well. We provide transitional housing. We have a home in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. We have a location in East St. Paul. And then we also have our permanent housing, which is also in St. Paul. And we do have relationships with shelters for women that are needing emergency shelter. However, we all know that that's a definite gap for a whole spectrum of clients that we serve. We do have street outreach. We provide basic needs for the women. Before every group, we have meals so that they can come in before groups and sit down as a community and have a meal before group, which is also very nice for them. We offer mental health and chemical dependency assistance, crisis counseling and intervention, and safety planning. And we do have an attorney on staff who works with our women around justice advocacy and legal services. One unique thing that Breaking Free offers is we do have an offenders prostitution program, otherwise known as John School, and that occurs once a month. And many of the men that go through John School are picked up through the stings that happen across the metro. And what it is, it's a restorative justice program conducted by Breaking Free in partnership with law enforcement, prosecutors, and district courts. And it's first-time offenders that are court-ordered to an 8-hour seminar, again, that happens once a month, conducted by Breaking Free staff, prosecutors, law enforcement, experts in men's sexuality, sex addictions, and sexual health, community members, and most importantly, we do have survivors of sex trafficking and prostitution that attend and speak from their perspective at John School. And why it works, it addresses the underlying attitudes and assumptions that enable and encourage offenders to participate in prostitution, and it re-educates and holds offenders accountable for their role in sex trafficking. And for any referrals or if you want more information, you can call Breaking Free at 651-645-6557, and anyone at the organization should be able to help you. Thank you.
Just a technical note as well. If individuals do have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation.
Hello, and thank you for your participation in the webinar. My name is Erin Gregoria, and I am a case manager with Catholic Charities Trafficking Victim Services. The Catholic Charities Trafficking Victim Services, we are committed, our mission is that we're committed to providing services that will restore human dignity, promote healing to individuals who are identified as international victims of human trafficking. Just a little background about our program. We were established in 2010. We are federally funded. However, our fiscal agent is Catholic Charities. Part of our role in our jobs is to advocate, and this includes being a part of the statewide Human Task Force. We're also a part of the Gerald D. Vick Human Task Force. Another aspect of our advocacy is creating collaboration and partnerships with other service providers. We are a referral-based program working with law enforcement agencies. Our program, under guidelines of our grant, can provide direct financial services to those who are pre-certified. Our program, however, will advocate for all victims because the ultimate goal is to attain positive recovery. This is used through the Catholic Charities internal services. Catholic Charities Trafficking Victim Services, in order for us to assist victims so that they are not going to return to their traffickers, we focus on the following elements. Housing, we can assist, depending on the guidelines of our grant, we can assist with emergency short-term and long-term, also depending on the individual's goals. We have access to providing food and other basic needs. We have access to transportation services as needed. Also part of our services, we have the St. Mary's Clinic that can provide medical care to those who are uninsured as well as qualify under poverty guidelines. We have mental health counseling. We do have bilingual services from a bilingual therapist on staff. We provide legal assistance and immigration services. We have an accredited rep as well as a team of pro bono attorneys. We have dental services, and then throughout the office we can provide interpreting and translating services. Part of our referral process with the Trafficking Victim Services and Catholic Charities, in order for us to assist both international and domestic human traffic victims, they do need to be pre-certified through appropriate law enforcement agencies. Both domestic and international populations will receive direct financial assistance and other referral resources. However, this will be based on the guidelines of our program's funding sources. Typically, what this would look like is law enforcement would refer to our program. We would take the initial intake, and then we would devise an individual case management plan. As Lauren said, victims are focused in the victim-centered with appropriate resources, be it culturally appropriate resources or what the person needs. However, we are not limited to law enforcement agents. We receive referrals from NGOs, medical professionals, faith-based committees and advocacies, and also walk-ins. Under grant requirements, they may or may not be eligible for direct financial services. However, this does not mean that we can't work with them to find within the Catholic Charities Agency programming services that will help them through the recovery. Another aspect that I did not include in my slides, and I apologize, is that we have a big part of our program is building awareness and community understanding of human trafficking. So we do provide free training to any sector of our community. We are not biased to any group of individuals, professionals, general public. It's very important that we can educate all of those so they understand the detrimental effects that human trafficking has on all of us. For more information, please contact the program manager, Hamel Kapley, and the number provided is his direct office number. That is 651-647-3176. And then again, my name is Erin Gregoria. I am the case manager, and this is my direct line as well, and that's area code 651-647-3128. I just want to thank you again for your attention.
I'm back again, and I just realized I never introduced myself before I got into the previous presentation, but my name is Lauren Ryan. I work with the International Institute of Minnesota. The program we run is called, it's long, everyone just calls it NTAC, but it stands for Northern Tier Anti-Trafficking Consortium. It's called a consortium because it's made up of 7 different agencies across 14 different states. So we provide direct, comprehensive case management to foreign-born survivors of sex and labor trafficking. As I stated, we cover 14 different states, including Puerto Rico. So I am the regional coordinator for the whole state of Minnesota and then northern Wisconsin as well. Essentially what that means is if someone is identified in this area, they're referred to my program, then it is my responsibility to make sure that person is provided with services. In order to qualify for my program, they do need to be foreign-born. NTAC and the International Institute, all of our programs are specified to work with foreign-born individuals. Could be refugees, asylees, immigrants, non-immigrants. But we have a lot of ESL classes, nursing training assistant programs, so our structure is focused on foreign-born or foreign nationals. Individuals can be adults, they can be minors, they can be men and women. We service all of them. What we do is, since our coverage area is so big, I am only one person, as much power as I think I have. I cannot provide direct services all across Minnesota. So what our program does is we use something we call vendors. And these are relationships that we obtain with different, it could be domestic violence, sexual assault centers, or it could be refugee resettlement. I know some of you listening are either vendors or have spoken to me about their vendor relationship. But we come out to your agency, we provide you with training on human trafficking, and then we provide you with the NTAC protocol and procedures, and then your agency would be responsible for providing those direct services if anyone is identified in your area. Similar to the program at Catholic Charities, we do have some financial funds that can be spent directly on clients, and then there is a little bit of incentive to the vendor agencies, a little bit of money that would go back to your staffing and administrative costs if you were providing services to an individual in your area. So if I've already spoken to you, or again, if you're out in greater Minnesota and this sounds like something you're interested in, please feel free to contact me. And similar to Erin, I'm always more than willing to come out to a training, provide technical assistance on any of these cases. Some services that are frequently needed after someone escapes or is rescued for a trafficking situation, always crisis intervention, safety planning, number one. Safety is number one. Then after that, we look at trauma counseling, support, chemical dependency could be needed, medical, dental assistance. One of my clients hadn't seen a doctor in 11 years and had some very serious medical issues going on. Obviously, legal assistance could be needed, whether that's with a criminal process, civil, or immigration matters. Culturally specific or linguistic support, such as interpreting. Like I said, a lot of my clients go directly into English as a second language class. Basic living needs, housing, that's the number one need of all my clients, and that is the biggest gap that we're seeing. Otherwise, just other basic needs, food, clothing, transportation. And then once they get to a point where they're ready, we will help them with job placement assistance or getting connected with the county, making sure they have all their benefits. Our ultimate goal is to assist them on their road to independence, their road to self-sufficiency, while always keeping safety in mind. So through our comprehensive case management services, we will either provide these services on site if we have them. If we don't, we've developed partnerships or relationships with different organizations that do provide these sites that we refer out to. Just to address and let you guys know some of the barriers that I've been seeing when I'm trying to assist someone. Obviously, I know I should be getting more referrals, and the only reason I'm not is because human trafficking is so hidden and it's really difficult to identify these individuals. So I'm seeing this as a huge barrier, that individuals are not able to seek help. That could be because they're confined, it could be because of language barriers, it could be because they're running into different systems or organizations that don't screen and don't catch what's happening to them, or it could just be an indifference or unawareness by community members to say something, to notice that something is not right, and to call law enforcement or to ask an individual if they need help. So this really is a community problem that first we need help identifying these individuals, and then comes in the services component. Some other resources that, like I said, huge gap in housing, and I think this goes for all of our services. Trying to find emergency housing or trying to find transitional or permanent housing for individuals is really a struggle. If I have individuals identified in greater Minnesota, sometimes that can be a struggle to find services near them. I also work with males, and a lot of my males are victims of labor trafficking. So sometimes it can be difficult finding services that fit organizations' criteria of who they're willing to help and who they're not. So that's just something I wanted to point out. Referrals, if you have any questions, concerns, if you're working with a domestic individual and you don't know where to refer them to, please refer them to me. As with any of these agencies, we will make sure they get to the appropriate place. So if someone is not eligible for my services, I will make sure that they get to a place where they can be helped to a different agency. I am going to be going on maternity leave at the end of February, so I have a second individual listed. She is my lucky fill-in at the International Institute. Her name is Carissa. So I have her contact information as well as mine up there. So if it's mid-March and you need something, feel free to give Carissa a call. Otherwise, I will be back in May. And feel free to check out our website. And I just want to stress to everyone listening to really, utilize this panel, utilize us while we're here, ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions, make sure to email us after. We really want to get this information out. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Eagle, speaker. I represent the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. My position there is the director of the Sacred Journeys program. Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center was originally created by 4 Native American women about 25 years ago. And since that time, we've expanded and grown, and our programs are primarily, we serve within Minnesota Indian Resource Center the Native women population and their children. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our resource center. First of all, we have a wide variety of services that are there, and then I will go into our Sacred Journey program. We have a Cherish the Children daycare center that's open to everyone. We also have, going up through our building, we have a program that is called Family Stabilization Program. Primarily their contracts are through Hennepin County. They consist of a life skills parenting program. It's a pretty intense parenting program, about 6 months. We also have a family assessment contract through Hennepin County, and that is for more low level. We also have Indian Child Welfare Coordinator that works with in-state tribes within the state of Minnesota and coordinates with Hennepin County. And primarily her job is to help reunify children or to preserve the families. Just recently, we've been added an incredible program to our agency, and it is called Nokomis Endod. And that, in language, that just means our grandmother's house. It is an outpatient treatment program, very successful at this point right now. We are at almost full capacity with our treatment program. Recently gone through our few first graduations. It's a very intensive, culturally specific treatment program for Native American women. But also, too, within that whole scope, my program, Sacred Journeys, originally was called Healing Journeys Program, and that was just recently changed a few years ago. Within MIWRC, the Healing Journeys program that I oversee is actually probably one of the longest programs that we've had at our agency. And as a result of Healing Journeys, as I'm going along, I'm going to be telling you that Healing Journeys is primarily for older women, and it's been there for a very, very long time. And as a result of that, we've gone into the Ocean Kijaway program. We've added the sexual assault program, and those are the programs that I'm going to be talking to you about. Right now, the Healing Journeys program, the target populations are adult, urban-based American Indian women who have experienced different types of trauma: physical assault, sexual assault, commercial sexual exploitation, family or intimate partner abuse. A lot of our women that come into our agency, we take them as they come to us. A lot of them are homeless. They have experiencing other traumatizing events in their lives. We provide culturally grounded harm reduction support for these adult American Indian women, and that average age is about 22 and older. I wanted to let you know that when I first took over this position, we had 4 women that had been with our agency through Healing Journeys program for many, many years. And rather than letting them go, it was decided that we keep them there, and they have become incredible mentors for our young girls and young women coming into the Healing Journeys program. So I just wanted to give some accolades out for those young women there, also to seek out our elders. So these women are actually becoming elders within our Healing Journeys program. We also provide client-centered, strength-based mostly, and we call it a safe place. We have activities. They utilize cultural teachings for a more protective aspect of culture, the protective aspects of different cultures. And what I'm referring to is that we have different tribes. Not only, like myself, I'm a member of the Blackfoot tribe in southern Alberta, but we have Sioux tribes. We have tribes from all over the United States. We have no tribes personally right now from Canadian tribes. But we try to go through the activities we use cultural teachings and protective aspects within those cultures to encourage healing, building resilience, reduce risk factors of repeated trauma. We always try to counter that normalization of sexual and gender-based violence. Within our culture, our Native American culture, it's become normal and it's normalized. And I see that a lot when we do interviews and we talk to the young women. As one of the speakers was talking earlier, they don't see themselves as victims of sexual exploitation. They see it as a survival, a way of surviving. I need to survive the streets. I need to survive the family. So it becomes normal. And within our organization itself, that's what we try to counter that. The Healing Journeys group, they meet structured groups every Tuesday and Thursday. They can come in. They arrive in the morning about 9 o'clock. They are there till about 2 o'clock. I have a wide variety of different programs that the Healing Journey women involved in, but one of the most important things to remember is that as Native American people, we are very spiritually connected to our tribes and our culture. Many of our women are the product of historical trauma. Their parents, their grandparents are victims of boarding school, illegal adoptions. And when you're in that circle of historical trauma and you weren't parented yourself by your own parent, how can you parent your children? So a lot of these women come from that background. Healing Journeys, as a result of Healing Journeys and a successful Healing Journeys, it came to us and it came to light that we had to do something for the younger girls. And we originally started a group called Oceanikijwe. Oceanikijwe is an Ojibwe term, and it just means young girl or young woman. Oceanikijwe program provides case management and social support needs for young girls ages 11 to 21 who have experienced gender-based violence and are at high risk of commercial sexual exploitation. Let me back up here a bit. When we first started Oceanikijwe group, the age group was 16 and over, so 16 to the age of 22. But when we were doing our intake with the assistance of our evaluator, we have an intensive intake process. I can tell you that intensive intake process is about 4 forms that have to be filled out. So one of them is sexual exploitation information. And what we were finding is with the group from the 16 to the age of 21 or 22 group is that many of them had younger sisters. And it was recorded in our evaluation, and what we found that these young girls were now being exploited by gangs, by their families, and it's very sad in our community. So right now, we've actually reduced the age of our Oceanikijwe group, and I now have 2 groups. I have a group of the younger girls that come in, and they start at the age of 11 to 16. They come in on Mondays, and I have an incredible worker by the name of Shauna McBride. She handles both groups. The older group comes in on Wednesdays, and they are there for approximately right after school from 3 to 5. Some of the services that we have that are there, all of our programs are carceally based. They're support groups. We emphasize healthy behavior, chemical dependency education and prevention. We also have holistic care. It's really primary that they have good nutrition. We teach the young girls because they're coming from homes where the mother's not there. Majority of our young Oceanikijwe girls, their mothers are still on the streets, prostituting themselves or in violent relationships. So they don't know how to cook. They don't know how to shop. We also do native craft making where we bring in resource people to teach them a new craft. They've never been taught these things. We use resources and referrals and other support programs. Oceanikijwe participants are recruited through clients word of mouth, local schools, youth serving agencies, as well. We have a partnership with the Minneapolis Police Department to refer American Indian minors arrested for high-risk petty crimes or prostitution, rather than robbing them through the juvenile detention area. Oceanikijwe programming follows the best practices guidelines and helps to denormalize violence, encourages participants in the American Indian community at large to view sexual assault and intimate partner violence as unacceptable in our Native American community. It is wrong. It does not follow our teachings as traditional Native American people. Oceanikijwe, I talked to you a little bit earlier, but we have a really good structured group. I have another program. Sorry about that. We just went to different slides. My sexual assault program. I have a sexual assault advocate that's just an incredible person. Her name is Sarah Al-Kafahani. She's of Egyptian descent. really well accepted in our community. She's been with us for a number of years. Incredible working person. Our sexual assault program at MIWRC has successfully operated a dedicated crime victim services program. The sexual assault program at our agency began in 2001. She provides direct services which include crime intervention, crisis intervention, individual counseling and support. She does group counseling and support and also emergency services. She does victim assistance services. She also does traditional healing services and community outreach and education. The contracted sexual assault support group she also does. Right now we have a contract with Hennepin County Women's Workhouse, and Sarah goes out there bi-weekly. She also does a support group out there with Native American women that identify as Native. Her group has, when I first took over the program, the women were just clamoring to get into that group out at the workhouse, and they self-identify as Native from tribes all over the United States, maximum at about 30 women. So right now, those numbers are changing. They go up and down. Actually, they fluctuate according to where they're discharged. One of the most important things that Sarah does with that group out at the community correction facility is she does a exit plan with them, safety plan. She refers them to our agency, to different programs there. Maybe they need to have parenting. Maybe they need to have treatment programs, so we're referring them to Nokomis NDOD program. But one of the most important things about Sarah's position is that we have incorporated her into all of our programs. So not just only my case managers in Healing Journeys doing and following their curriculum, but Sarah comes in and she does anything that is related to sexual assault and a presentation. Both of my workers, my sexual assault worker and my Oceanikijia Way worker, they go to a local school that's located, and it's called Center School. It's a charter school, and they go there, they do education on all different types of topics. The young people are Center School. They've probably reached that whole point of going through the regular school system, and they're now at that point right now, so they're at Center School. So we go in there and we do education on all different types of topics. Sarah also does a weekly sexual assault support group at our agency that meets every Monday. You're welcome to do, and then we can do walk-ins, we can do referrals, we can do talk-ins if you just want to come in and refer somebody for her sexual assault support group. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my program, the Circuit Journeys program. All three programs are trauma-informed, client-centered, offering a wide range of culturally grounded activities to help girls and women heal from violence, build lives for themselves and their children. MIWRC's education and community awareness raising work also extends to system change efforts on a local level, tribal level, regional level, national, in some cases, international level. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things that we're doing right now, and we're very, very proud of those, that we are very part of that. We are an integral part. My executive director, Suzanne Koplinger, was a key player and also a key partner in the passage in 2011 of the Safe Harbors Act. Right now, Hennepin County, also too, the Hennepin County Attorney Office is reviewing a new screening tool provided by MIWRC to more accurately screen youth in the county system for sexual exploitation. MIWRC provided key outcomes from the Oceanikijia Way program to the United States Office of the Attorney General Defending Childhood Task Force. This input will be used to inform federal policy going forward. If you're interested in my program, I just want to let you know that primarily our women are Native American women. You can contact me directly at my office, Linda Eagle-Speaker, Sacred Journeys Program Director, 612-728-2019. I do have voicemail. You can also reach me on my email at lspeaker@miwrc.org to make a referral for any programs specific to Sacred Journeys. Thank you.
Hello, I am Artika Roller. and I am with the Family Partnership Pride Program. And I'll give you a little bit about our agency history. The Family Partnership is a nonprofit organization in the Twin Cities. We're over 135 years old. We deliver our services by advocacy, counseling, and education to help families solve their problems and create safe and healthy neighborhoods. We have three components to the Family Partnership. Back in about 2 years ago, in 2011, we merged the Family and Children's Service and Reuben Lynn Family Services merged and turned into the Family Partnership. We have therapeutic child care services with that merger, and then also we have family and community programs, and then counseling and therapy. Our mission is to build strong families, vital communities, and better futures for our children. Our service summary of the PRIDE program is that the PRIDE stands for Out of Prostitution into Independence, Dignity, and Equality. It was developed in 1978 by a survivor and her therapist. The goal of the program, or the PRIDE program, is to help women and teens escape trafficking, prostitution, and exploitation. We believe that it is a form of violence that undermines families, exploits women and children. Our core elements include group, individual coaching or case management, court advocacy, and crisis services. PRIDE's service philosophy is using a comprehensive approach to assist individual victims and their families with addressing self-sufficiency and recovering from trauma of sexual exploitation and trafficking. Three components of the PRIDE program is the Teen PRIDE program, support program for juvenile women who are at risk for being trafficked, sexually exploited, or engaging in survival sex. The Adult PRIDE program for women over 18 that are victims that have been trafficked, sexually exploited, or prostituted. And then a policy system civic engagement component of our program in partnership with Jeff Bauer, who is our policy system and civic engagement director at the Family Partnership. Our program services include case management services, court advocacy, support groups, prevention groups, policy and system advocacy, presentations, the Teen PRIDE groups and prevention and intervention, 24-hour crisis line, and subsidized housing. We have three support groups that happen at Lake Street, our Lake Street office. We also do a workhouse group with our advocate, Athleen Johnson, on Friday morning. I'm just going to highlight a few of our services. One of our services that we offer is our case management coaching. Our case management consists of, or all of our advocates are trained in motivational interviewing, which is comprised of, accurately understanding what's going on in the lives of the women and teens that we work with, unconditional positive regard, non-judgmental services, and really just being genuine, just really going in there and understanding that what's going on is tough, but we believe that every woman and every youth that walk through our door are worthy young women, and they can make it. They can do the things, and we can support them in changing their circumstances and helping them with healing and recovery. Along with our case management services, part of that, all of our advocates are trained in the stages of changes, and that is the 7 components that really look at what does it take for an individual to move from point A to point B. The third piece that our advocates are trained in is ethical issues and boundaries. We have some there is some licensing that really guide those ethical issues and boundaries, And then our program is also accredited by the Council on Accreditation for Domestic Violence Case Management Services. The third piece to that case management services is case consultation. A lot of the listeners or people that are participating on the panel and also participating in the webinar are our community partners, and it takes all of us to do this work. So we do case consultation, starts immediately at the intake process and continues throughout the whole case. That consultation may be with other case managers, staff within the PRIDE program, probation, housing providers, mental health providers, CD and chemical dependency providers. So we really need everybody to take part in some of our case management. The third piece that we do, or we're going to highlight the PRIDE program, is our court advocacy. We're not attorneys, but at the same time, a lot of the women need court support within the criminal justice system. It could be a civil case, a criminal case, trials, and then also with victim advocates. Victim advocates that work with, in partnership with the courts, we go in and partner with them, working on a trial right now that our victim needed support. All of the partners that we work with definitely are skilled experts, but sometimes we see things happening within the court system, like a youth that is 15 that hasn't been in school for a couple years, and then her attorney may give her a 100-page affidavit to read. And so just being there to support them through that process and maybe sitting through with them, reading that, or working with their attorney to find out some other methods that she can understand what's going on with her case. And other things with court advocacy is just making sure the women are aware of what they are agreeing to. Sometimes court can be scary, and the women may say, I just want this over with. And so backing up and saying, do you really understand what's going on, and getting them connected with the resources that can help them navigate through those systems. The last service I would like to highlight is our Teen Pride program. Our Teen Pride program, we have an advocate, Charisma Smith, who partners with, or has partnered with, Minneapolis Park and Rec, YouthLink, County Homeschool, Minneapolis Public Schools to provide intervention and prevention groups. Our intervention really looks like getting information out to youth about, what does sexual exploitation look like? What does sex trafficking look like? What are some of the recruiting techniques? I think it's been mentioned here before that young women don't identify as victims or don't understand or agree to sexual exploitation. And so there is this perception that young women that are prostituted may agree to this or somehow want to participate in this process. So doing some intervention and getting or some prevention work also, and letting them know what that looks like. And then on the flip side, demand that no one has the right to sell another human being, and looking at what those risk factors may also be. And then we use My Life, My Choice, which is a best practice of the juvenile justice program, to do some intervention work with young women. I'll talk a little bit about the populations that we serve. During 2011, the PRIDE program provided a total of 2,076 units of services of outreach, information, and referrals. These may be one-time interactions with young women and adult women to provide them information and services. I talked a little bit about the court advocacy, and so it may be someone that is in court and they're just lost and don't know, what they should do or how they should proceed, and connecting those individuals with the right services. That also could be community outreach. Our advocate, Marie Isaiah, does a wonderful job with doing information at places like Homeless Connect, community resource fairs, and so those are individual units of service. Next, we have about 268 ongoing case management services, and that would be women and youth that have received 10 or more services and that they are connected with an advocate or a case manager, and they are working towards some goals. We also have 807 units of group services delivered. That would be at our Lake Street location. We have groups 3 times a week there, also at Youth Link, and again at the Hennepin County Workhouse. The populations that we serve, roughly around 35% African American women, 22% European descent women, 20% American Indian women, and 11% multicultural or multiracial women, with 2% Asian Pacific Islander, 6% African-born, and our African-born population continues to grow every year, 2% Hispanic or Latino, and then there's 2% of the women that did not identify or usually did not identify what their race was. By age, our clients are about 12% 13 to 17 years old, 28% 18 to 29, 44 30 to 40 years old, and 16% are 45 or older. And at least 89% of our women have identified that they are low income or no income, and within that 89%, 81% are at least 100% of the poverty level. We talked a little bit about barriers, and these are barriers not only that our advocates have identified, these are also barriers that the women identify. And transportation is a big issue to getting to services. Service requirements, so things like I need an ID, my birth certificate, I may be homeless, but I need to prove that I have residence. So some of the service requirements, we talked about the barrier around housing. Well, there are wonderful housing programs, but sometimes we have a housing program that services low-income people, but the women can't have all unlawful detainers on their record for 3 years. That is a big barrier for us finding services for the women. A lack of training of service providers is also a barrier. I talked a little bit about giving a youth that hasn't been in school for a long time a 100-page affidavit and asking her to not only read it but understand what's in that affidavit. Long waiting list, 2-year waiting list for a housing program, 5-year waiting list for Section 8. Those continue to be barriers. And then unmet basic needs also continue to be a barrier for our women. And then I have a last one component or a barrier that a lot of the women that we work with are moving on. They've had some recovery and healing. They're working on self-sufficiency plans, and they're in school. They may be attending a community college or a 4-year college, and they get to the end of their program, and because they may have some things on their criminal background, they cannot pass the background check in order to do their internship. And so we are working on an internship program. We've had 2 interns that went through our program this past semester. And what happened was one of the biggest barriers for her was that we said we would accept her. We understood what was on her background check, and the school came back to us and said that it might be a legal issue for their law department to have her continue her internship. So we're talking at someone at the end of their school and need this internship to complete their degree, and being told at that point in time that they might not be able to complete their degree because they cannot find a place that will let them intern. So those are some of the policy things that we need to look at, and those create great barriers for the women that we work with. If you would like to make a referral to the PRIDE program, or if you would like a presentation or a training for your staff, please do not hesitate to call us at 612-728-2062, and we're also can be located at thefamilypartnership.org. That is our website.
Hey folks, this is Nikki from Day One, and this is my radio voice. So I know you've got a lot of information today, so I'm going to just quickly go over what Day One is, and then there will be time for your questions. So essentially Day One is creating access to safety and services through relationships and technology. And I noticed, looking over on the side, that many of you listening are in the network, so you know how important these relationships and the technology are. So Day One is a statewide network, and in this slide it says domestic violence agencies. However, we are more than that. We are now dual domestic violence and sexual assault. We have a couple of standalone sexual assault, and we have victim services agencies like the Council on Crime and Justice and the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. So I just wanted to note that Day One is expanding, and now we are about 60 programs in the network. So yeah, shout out to all of you that are in the network as well. So the model. As I mentioned before, the relationships are very, very important. I think people often think of Day One as the website, which is really, really awesome, but the website wouldn't work if we didn't have the relationships. There's actually a similar model in Europe that has a website. However, since they don't build those relationships, nobody really uses it, and therefore the service is much less effective. So the relationships look like all of you knowing each other, knowing the services that you provide, and therefore doing better referrals and connecting victims to safety. The other part is the web-based technology, which we have a database that anyone in the network has access to, where they can see who has bed space and where. And not only bed space, which I think people usually think of when they think Day One, but any services that are provided through any of the agencies and programs in the network, or you're able to search, even down to the demographics or identity of the victim, or even down to who will do an OFP in this county, or who has a support group, things like that. So the web-based technology is very important in connecting victims to safety. And then the best practices, which is what I do. I go in and train programs on the referral process we'd like folks to use, because we know if we're all on the same page, we're going to do better at assisting victims. And with that, you have the result of immediate and seamless access to safety and services. So part of Day One is the statewide Minnesota Domestic Violence Crisis Line, as you can see here. And it's unique because based on where the caller is calling from on their area code and their prefix, they are connected to a program in their area. And clearly the idea with that is it's one call and they're connected to a program that can assist them. However, if that program is full or they don't offer the services that the victim wants, they therefore will connect them to another advocate that can help them in another area. Part of Day One now is we've taken on this anti-trafficking collaboration, because what we're hearing and what we're seeing is that this is really important. And what we know is that all of these types of violence intersect. So with that, we've come together with all of these folks and doing this webinar
What we're also doing is talking to programs in the network about what that means for them, how they can assist trafficking victims, and we're updating the site. So those of you that are in the network, you'll see that we've added fields around human trafficking specific to labor and sexual trafficking. And I encourage you to go into the site and check that out under demographics, narrow the search by, things like that. And the goal with that is enhancing the Minnesota Domestic Violence Crisis Line to support these victims of trafficking, which is part of the reason why we're doing this webinar today, is so that you all know when you get a call, you can go into the site and find many of the folks who spoke today as well. So this is our last slide for day one. Here's our contact information. Just to note, day one is a program of Cornerstone, also known as the Sheila Wellstone Center. And here's my contact on this slide. So the big part of this webinar is meeting you where you're at. So at this time, we invite you to write any questions you have in the chat, and then you can even call out specific people. If you have a question specifically about breaking free services, you can go ahead and say that in your question. And then we will have each panelist answer to the best of their knowledge. And also for those that may want to call in and actually ask a question verbally, we're going to unmute everyone. And then if you've muted yourself, you can unmute yourself by pressing *7.
The conference has been unmuted.
Something happened.
Hey folks, also if you are not muted and you do have background noise, if you don't want people to hear you, you might want to hit *6 to mute yourself.
And this is Lauren again from the International Institute. I was realizing as I was going through my presentation that the topic or the title is Trafficking in Minnesota, and we didn't get a real good chance to talk about Greater Minnesota. And a lot of these organizations are based in the metro area. But I do want to point out there are organizations that are working on this. There are organizations that are developing a task force in their area. So I know in Duluth and PAFTA has a very strong anti-trafficking task force. Rochester is working on theirs, as well as Brainerd and the Bemidji area. And I also want to point out, if anyone is interested in joining the Minnesota statewide task force, they do have meetings quarterly. So 4 times a year there is a meeting. And Amy Kenzie through the Minnesota Department of Health facilitates those meetings, and they're just wonderful. Come in, you just listen, you gain a wealth of information about trafficking. There's so many different members, and they're all multidisciplinary from every different organization, every different type of discipline out there. So it's a great way to learn more about trafficking. So feel free to shoot me an email, and I can give you that contact information for Amy if you're interested.
And just so everybody knows, we will have access to this webinar, the audio version, shortly after. Within the week, we're going to post that through ReadyTalk and also through YouTube. And we also will send out the PowerPoint slides to you all as well.
Something? I don't know if it's a long distance.
And just so you know, when you shut out of the ReadyTalk, you will be provided with a questionnaire. So if you don't feel like asking a question now, you can ask it on that questionnaire, and we will get back to you. So we'll just stay on for another minute or so. If anybody has any questions, feel free. If not, we all want to thank you for being a part of this webinar and all of the fantastic work that you do. Feel free to get in contact with any of these folks. If they can't help you, they will move on and find someone who can. We have a question in-house that we're going to have asked.
Can you say a little more about the term prostitution and the change around that and why you prefer not to use that term?
What do you think?
Sure. This is Nikki Beasley from Breaking Free. And it's kind of a short answer. The term prostitute connotates that this is a choice that the woman is making, as opposed to being prostituted, which is something that is inflicted or forced upon her. And that ultimately, and as we've said today, it is an act of violence against a woman or girl. And so that's really the short answer to it, is that we prefer the language of someone being prostituted as opposed to being a prostitute.
I think I was the one that brought that up. This is Lauren. Thank you for answering that, Nikki. I did bring that up and not explain why, and it's for the exact same reason that I learned from Breaking Free, is that it implies a choice.
And this is Nikki from Day One, and just to put out there that many programs have different philosophies and languages that they use, and so thank you for the clarification. All right, folks, so we're just going to wrap it up and end it. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact any of us. We thank you for your time and your great work. Have a fantastic Friday.
Thank you. Please stand by.